All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here on Nick's Strength and Power. So in this video, I thought a very interesting topic for you guys would be Vince McMahon's Bodybuilding Federation. Now, many of you guys are probably familiar with Vince McMahon through promoting the WWF and the WWE and being a pro wrestling promoter. But little do most people know, Vince McMahon actually tried to get into promoting bodybuilding because he thought that his promoting abilities were far superior to the abilities that the Weider brothers had, and he thought he could do a much better job than the IFBB. So in 1990, he attempted to start an organization to rival the IFBB, and he called his organization the WBF. So the WBF was it was kind of an interesting thing because what he was trying to do was kind of give the bodybuilder something similar to what he was giving the pro wrestlers. He would try to give each bodybuilder kind of an individual character. Sometimes they would wear costumes, they would have a persona, and it was just a very interesting thing what he was trying to do with the WBF. And he also paid his athletes very well, but I will get to that later. So basically, it's kind of controversial how he started the WBF and had his first bodybuilding show. So it all started with a magazine that Vince McMahon came out with called Bodybuilding Lifestyles Magazine. And this is a magazine that he actually hired Tom Platz to oversee the publishing of. So basically, Vince McMahon got a booth at the Olympia in 1990 for this magazine. So the magazine had its own booth at the Olympia. So it's also important to note that the 1990 Mr. Olympia competition was the first ever drug-tested Mr. Olympia competition. So that year at the Olympia, the lineup was very weak. Fans were very disappointed. There were a bunch of guys that got disqualified from the 1990 Mr. Olympia. So at that time, that was really one of the IFBB's weakest years in terms of the Olympia and in terms of crowd support because they had, these drug tests and they failed a bunch of bodybuilders. A bunch of bodybuilders got disqualified, and the bodybuilders that didn't get disqualified didn't look very good because they weren't taking drugs. So the fans were really left disappointed that year at the Olympia. So that's an important thing to note, that in 1990, the IFBB was trying out a drug testing program for their shows, and that was not really going well with the fan reactions. So at this 1990 Mr. Olympia, the magazine had its own expo. So Vince McMahon's magazine had an expo. So at that expo, what he was doing with that magazine booth was he was using the expo to hand out flyers for his upcoming bodybuilding competition that he was claiming would be better than the IFBB's Mr. Olympia. So at the Olympia, he basically snuck his way in with the magazine and used the Olympia as a platform to advertise his upcoming show. So in 1991, would be his first WBF championship. And it's kind of interesting to see that a lot of the bodybuilders who came over to the WBF were bodybuilders that actually failed the drug test in the in the IFBB. So he got a lot of bodybuilders that were disenfranchised with the IFBB because they failed the drug test and they were disqualified from shows and they weren't making any money. So they came over to the WBF. So let me read you guys a list of the WBF bodybuilders, or body stars, as Vince McMahon liked to call them. So Aaron Baker, Mike Christian, Vince Comerford, who was actually disqualified from that 1990 Olympia, David Dirth, Barry DeMay. Now, Barry DeMay was also disqualified from that 1990 Olympia the year prior. Johnny Morant, Danny Padilha. If you guys remember also, there's a lot of controversy with Danny Padilha in the IFBB. There was a lot of times where Franco Columbu beat Danny Padilha, where a lot of people would argue that Franco Columbu did not deserve to beat him. So Danny Padilha was also a guy who was very disenfranchised with how he was placing in the IFBB. Jimmy Quinn, Mike Quinn, Eddie Robinson, and Troy Zuccolatto. So that is the list of WBF body stars. Now, their main guy was Gary Stratum. Gary Stratum was the champ in 1991 and the 1992 championship. So there were only 2 WBF championships ever held, and Gary Stratum won them both. So Gary Stratum was kind of Vince McMahon's poster boy, and he was really the face of the WBF, and rightfully so. I mean, Gary Stratum had a great physique, but the main reason he didn't do well in the IFBB was his back was lacking. His back wasn't nearly as good as he looked from the front, but his upper body from the front looked absolutely amazing. He had crazy cap delts, he had a crazy chest, crazy arms, and his conditioning was pretty much always, pretty damn good. So Gary Stratum was the highest paid guy in the WBF, and that's another thing I wanted to mention, was contrary to the IFBB, they don't pay out contracts in the IFBB. So a bodybuilder in the IFBB would have to get sponsored by a supplement company or something like that to pay their bills. The IFBB only pays out prize money for winning a show, not a contract. So what Vince McMahon did is what he does for his wrestlers, and he would offer these guys contracts, 2-year or 3-year contracts, I think even 4-year contracts in some cases, like Gary Stratum. So Gary Stratum was actually the highest paid guy, and he was paid $400,000 per year for at least a 3-year contract, possibly a 4-year contract. So that's some pretty damn good money in the early 90s nonetheless, almost $500,000 per year to be a bodybuilder, guaranteed for 4 years. So you're guaranteed almost $2 million in the early 90s. That is a lot of money. So rumors report that the minimum contract started at $200,000 a year for a 2-year contract. So either way, even the lower level bodybuilders were making really good money with Vince McMahon's WBF organization. So they also had a weekly TV program. I believe that was also called the WBF Body Stars. And Vince McMahon also had a supplement company that he was heavily invested in called IcoPro. These were bodybuilding supplements that he had these WBF Body Stars, as he liked to call them. He had them advertise this line of bodybuilding supplements. Obviously, it wasn't a successful line because it's not still around today. So the 1991 WBF Championships, it was actually a pretty successful event. Regis Philbin was actually the host of the event. There's a pretty large turnout. It was held at a venue that Donald Trump owns. I believe it was the Bellagio. So it was a very big event, very successful. But the 1992 WBF Championships, that would be where Vince McMahon failed. So that's what we're going to get to next. So in 1992, Vince McMahon was famously having problems with the WWE/WWF, and there were a lot of allegations and rumors going around about steroid use. So Vince McMahon really tried to clean up his act. So what he did this year was he made the mistake that the IFBB made, and he started drug testing his guys. So in 1992, he implemented a very strict drug testing policy for the WBF, and he drug tested all the bodybuilders. So at the 1992 WBF Championships, all the bodybuilders came in looking terrible. Mike Quinn in particular came in looking extremely fat. His belly was hanging over his posing trunks. A lot of the bodybuilders were out of shape. They were flat, they were small, they were soft, and nobody really looked impressive at all. And the 1992 WBF Championships was just an absolute failure and a disaster for Vince McMahon compared to the first one. So after 1992, after that championship failure, Vince McMahon would actually call the Weider brothers on July 15th, 1992, and he would tell them that he's getting out of the bodybuilding game for good. And he really realized that he couldn't do what they were able to do, and he gave them credit for being so successful in their endeavors at promoting the Mr. Olympia competition. And he told them he was giving up. So a lot of people speculate that he was so respectful and called the Weiders because he wanted to use their magazines to still try to publicize that IcoPro supplement line that really still ended up failing. And that's why he tried to be cool with the Weiders towards the end. But overall, a lot of people just didn't know about this WBF, so I wanted to make a video about it because I thought it's a very, very fascinating thing that Vince McMahon tried to make this kind of superstar promotion out of bodybuilding and try to kind of turn it into what the WWE was. Now, even though he was super successful with the WWE, he also had a failure similar to this when he tried to rival the NFL. A lot of people might forget about this as well. But Vince McMahon tried to start an organization called the XFL, where he tried to, go head-to-head with the NFL, and that also failed miserably. So for whatever reason, Vince McMahon is very successful at promoting pro wrestling, but in terms of bodybuilding and other sports, he's always seemed to have a very bad track record with those attempts. So that is the story of the WBF, guys. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed the story. Please give the video a thumbs up. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.